Resident Evil's upcoming Dead by Daylight crossover looks to be a real treat for fans of being chased by giant lumpy monsters. With Resident Evil Reverse in something of a reverse, as Capcom backpedals on its initial launch plans to fix some of the multiplayer's more glaring issues, this crossover will likely be the next best thing for a while. In fact, it'll probably be the best Resident Evil crossover since the horror franchise collaborated with The Division 2 earlier this year. Infections, guns, a city cut off from the world, all that fitted together rather well. Then there was the time Resident Evil crossed over with Life After, because sure, why not? It's kinda nice to see Capcom playing so well with other studios that clearly have a far smaller development budget. And then there was the time Resident Evil crossed over with Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Sure, that one makes a little less sense from a lore, tone and genre perspective, but whatever, it's fun. You didn't come here for a list of Resident Evil crossovers, so I'll just mention the potential somewhat inevitable Fortnite crossover that's been teased and move on. The point is, if there's one thing Capcom loves, just absolutely loves, it's putting Resident Evil characters in as many games as possible. It's not hard to understand why the team at Behaviour Interactive agreed to work with Capcom on the Dead by Daylight crossover. According to creative director Dave Richard, "I'm super excited. I've been playing these games all my teens. I grew up with them. They're an influence, so it's absolutely amazing that this is happening. We're super excited to welcome this legendary content inside our universe. It's really been a dream come true to work with such an amazing franchise." Behaviour's profile has been slowly building over the past few years, as Dead by Daylight's player base and place within gaming popular culture has grown in strength. A crossover with Konami that brought Silent Hill to Dead by Daylight was, according to the developers at Behaviour, a similar treat to put together. You really get the vibe that everyone at Behaviour is just thrilled to get to play with other people's toys. Said the company's CMO David Reed about Konami and Capcom, "They're both legendary franchises. They're both great developers and publishers. It has been awesome for us to be able to work with these iconic properties. They've both been great partners." The bigger question is, what's in it for Capcom? It's always difficult to quantify just how much value comes from slapping your characters into another franchise solely for brand awareness. Are there any Dead by Daylight players who weren't sold on buying Resident Evil 3 last year when it came out, but are going to be persuaded by playing against the Nemesis in the crossover? Will people on the fence about Resident Evil Village suddenly decide that they want to buy that game even though it has no connection to the content within Dead by Daylight? How much does this kind of brand appeal really benefit Capcom in the short term? It's hard to say, especially considering that the characters appearing in Dead by Daylight are from Resident Evil 2 and 3. There's no Lady Dimitrescu, nobody from Resident Evil Village. This isn't a brand deal which even advertises the game that Capcom is currently trying to shill. I'm not saying that the Dead by Daylight event won't lead to Resident Evil sales, I'm just saying that it's hard to measure the success of this kind of crossover for Capcom. For most of the many Resident Evil collaborations, it feels like the real winner, the easily proven winner, is whichever game is temporarily hosting Resi characters. They gain a new influx of players who are fans of Resident Evil and want to try out the themed event in another game. It's far easier to quantify sales numbers or increased player numbers that come from a temporary partnership with Capcom. Some studios might worry that throwing their intellectual property into a bunch of different games might weaken their brand appeal overall. Certainly there are game developers and publishers that very rarely agree to these kinds of deals for fear that it'll reflect poorly on their franchise. Yet Capcom keeps throwing Resi characters into other games, working with developers big and small. We've got to assume that this works out for the company because Capcom keeps doing it over and over and over. It makes sense that rather than being damaged by flooding the market with endless Resident Evil crossovers, Capcom is feeling the benefit of keeping the franchise constantly on people's minds. By teaming up with Ubisoft or Square Enix or now Behaviour Interactive, Capcom can keep people talking about Resident Evil. And perhaps simply talking about the games is good enough for business to make this kind of thing worthwhile. There's an interesting phenomenon that we're seeing from big crossover games like Super Smash Bros. And Fortnite, where a younger generation of players are being introduced to iconic older franchises simply because they're added into their games. With the games industry constantly pushing for newer, better graphics, there's a constant struggle for publishers to keep their key brands in the foreground of the discussion. Resident Evil didn't become the juggernaut that it is today purely through releasing well-built games. Capcom has done everything possible to keep you thinking about Resident Evil, even when there aren't any new games on the immediate horizon. Remakes and remasters help with this as well. They keep reminding you of all the fun you had when you were younger, if you're old enough to remember the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Alternatively, if you're a young gun, a remake like Resident Evil 3 allows you to understand what's going on when a bunch of older gamers start waxing nostalgic about a PlayStation 1 game. And as Sony's Jim Ryan is keen to point out, not all PS1 games are as accessible now as they were at the time. Essentially, Capcom's constant efforts to bombard you with Resident Evil content, especially from Resident Evil 2 and 3, arguably the most iconic entries in the series, are an attempt to create something akin to the Wizard of Oz effect. You know the Wizard of Oz. Lions and tigers and bears, oh my! It's an iconic film that nearly a century after its initial release is still embedded in the public consciousness. It's a rite of passage to watch The Wizard of Oz as a kid, so that you can develop a healthy fear of flying monkeys. Capcom wants Resident Evil 2 to be gaming's Wizard of Oz. The tragedy of Raccoon City needs to be familiar to every single video game enthusiast, no matter how old they are. So even if a collaboration with Dead by Daylight doesn't immediately lead to a boost in sales for Resident Evil games, Capcom won't mind. The company is playing the long game. Keep people talking about the franchise, and every developer will have the same reaction to Resident Evil as the team at Behaviour. Everyone for decades will say, "Oh, I love Resident Evil. I used to play those games all the time when I was younger." Or alternatively, "Oh, I love Resident Evil. I remember that game from Dead by Daylight," or The Division 2, or Fortnite. Sometimes it's not even about getting people to play your game. It's about casting a wide enough net that everyone knows your name, no matter what kind of games they're actually playing. But what do you think? Am I talking nonsense? Probably, it wouldn't be the first time. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and have a lovely day.